Could US President Donald Trump trigger a return to the dark days of America's war on terror? And why is his administration so keen to suppress information about the CIA's post-9/11 rendition and torture program? In the second of two special investigations, we sent reporter Sarah Spiller to find out.
Camp X-Ray at the US Naval Base, Guantanamo Bay. Now deserted, but once a notorious symbol of America's global war on terror. Prisoners began arriving at Guantanamo in early 2002. Very soon, other detention camps were set up on the base. An estimated 780 people have been incarcerated here. Former US President Barack Obama wanted to close it down.
Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
Current President Donald Trump has different ideas.
President Obama talking about Gitmo, right? Guantanamo Bay, which by the way, we are keeping open, And we're gonna load it up with some bad dudes, believe me, we're gonna load it up.
Some fear Trump's presidency may trigger a return to the dark chapter of America's history, which followed the devastating atrocities of 9/11. In the aftermath of the attacks, the US launched the biggest global manhunt in its history. Shortly after, this man, Mark Fallon, a senior naval intelligence agent, arrived in the newly opened prison facility in Guantanamo Bay. He'd been appointed deputy director of a special task force charged with tracking down Al-Qaeda terrorists. But the more he saw of Guantanamo, the more concerned he grew.
What they were trying to do was create what's called learned helplessness, a theory based on experiments done on dogs. The sleep deprivation, extreme isolation, a practice called walling, facial slamming against the wall. It's a debilitating practice. It wears you down.
I didn't know whether it was day or night outside. I didn't know the times. There was no calendar. I'd been on solitary confinement almost now for a year and a half, and I wanted access to other human beings and to have meaningful communication with my family. A son had been born. I didn't even know what his name was. So there was all these sorts of things happening, and so once I exploded in my cell literally and punched and kicked and cried and screamed and all of those sorts of things.
In November 2002, a new commander arrived at Guantanamo. His name was Major General Jeffrey Miller.
If you speak to many of the other prisoners who were held at that time in Camp X-Ray and elsewhere, they'll tell you that the regime brought during his period was the harshest they faced.
You know, he's brutalizing these prisoners at Gitmo. He has this program called the Frequent Flyer Program. We wakes them up in the middle of the night, just transfer them around. It's sleep deprivation, it's isolation. They were doing mock executions. They wanted to bring people up in helicopters and make it look like they're going to be thrown out. They were just making it up as they went. They were using, their imaginations were running wild.
At the time, Miller himself showed no concern about the regime he ran in Guantanamo.
Everything that we do inside Camp Delta, America can be proud of.
Then, in 2003, he was sent to Iraq to advise about interrogation there.
I tried to stop him. I went back to the Pentagon and said, this guy is clueless, doesn't know what he's doing. You know, he's brutalizing these prisoners.
In 2004, appalling images emerged from Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. We also have deeply disturbing footage, starkly illustrating the desperation the regime created in prisoners. The images from Abu Ghraib caused shock around the world, and in the aftermath, 11 relatively low-ranking US soldiers were convicted with sentences ranging from imprisonment to reprimand. Afterwards, Major General Miller, who'd advised about interrogation, addressed a press conference in the prison.
Yes, I would like to personally apologize to the people of Iraq for the actions of the small number of leaders and soldiers who violated our policy and may have committed criminal acts.
Major General Miller insisted that torture and abuse at Abu Ghraib was the responsibility of rogue soldiers, not the product of a top-down culture. We tried unsuccessfully to contact Major General Miller through the US Department of Defense. They declined to pass on our questions, as he has now retired.
Our own procedures are internationally recognized for humane detention and proper interrogation.
Today, the US has a new commander-in-chief who, during his election campaign, openly called for the return of waterboarding, a practice condemned by a UN special rapporteur as torture.
They said, what do you think of waterboarding? I said, I think we absolutely need it. We should have it. And if we can, we should have worse.
When the President of the United States, the most powerful person on earth, says these things, it just encourages people to behave in the most barbaric way.
Lawyer Clive Stafford Smith's organisation, REPRIEVE, has represented 80 prisoners at Guantanamo who've been released.
One of the great truisms is if you don't know what history is, you won't learn from history and you'll repeat the mistakes. And, you know, we have someone in the White House right now who knows nothing about history and who is liable to repeat any mistake that's been made back to the Spanish Inquisition. And so we need the truth out there.
But today, some say, the American administration seems even more determined than ever to stop the truth about the CIA's post-9/11 program getting out. And that led to one of the most disturbing claims we heard during the course of making this film.
And it's this, that the torture of detainees in the past is now impeding the quest for justice following the 9/11 attacks. Over the past years, legal hearings have been underway at a secret court on the US naval base in Guantanamo.
America's justification for holding prisoners at Guantanamo is controversial. By declaring that the war on terror is an actual ongoing war, the US government has argued it can detain captives of this war without charge for as long as it wants. But if they do then charge any of these detainees with specific crimes, for example, the 5 men charged with involvement in the 9/11 atrocity, they are to be tried by Guantanamo's special war courts, known as military commissions. One of the 5 is Ammar al-Baluchi, accused of helping fund flight training for the 9/11 hijackers. In Washington, we met al-Baluchi's defense team. These civilian and military lawyers are approved by the Pentagon. But that doesn't stop them being deeply critical of the treatment handed out to their client by interrogators.
In my 19 years of service, the rule we have always been taught is we don't torture.
There's a thing that has the innocuous name of water dousing. And water dousing is waterboarding without a board. It's essentially drowning in ice water.
Many of those things, and worse, occurred to Mr. al-Baluchi.
The US government says certain classified evidence on torture must be kept secret, but al-Baluchi's defense team says that prevents them defending him properly.
This is a death penalty case, and as such, we're entitled to, all evidence that's relevant and material to Mr. al-Baluchi's defense, and that would include a lot of evidence from his time in CIA custody when he was being tortured for 3.5 years. The prosecution has consistently dragged their feet on giving us that evidence.
The defense finds itself in the position of having to make sure that the very values that the prosecution or the U.S. government has claimed for so many decades are actually upheld. Therefore, for me, it is a chance, as I see it, to truly uphold the constitutional values of the United States.
I appreciate that Sterling has a much more measured response to this, but no, it makes me angry that 17 years post-September 11th almost, we are still sitting in a courtroom in an offshore prison at Guantanamo Bay with a prosecution that is determined to hide torture from more than a decade ago. And that, I think, is offensive to, and should be offensive to all Americans.
Andrews Air Base near Washington, D.C. This is where our journey starts to the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo. 45 square miles of America on the southeastern corner of Cuba. The military commission hearings take place at Camp Justice. Inside this camp, there is a multi-million-dollar legal complex so secret we're not allowed to film it or say where it is. Journalists, meanwhile, are billeted in these tents.
The trip here to Guantanamo has only been possible under very strict conditions. We've had to sign a long document agreeing to restrictions on what we can film. We're accompanied at all times by a military minder. That minder checks our footage. So all the pictures you will see from here have been vetted.
First light at Camp Justice, Guantanamo. Every day begins the same way, with the Star-Spangled Banner. The media HQ is based in a partially derelict aircraft hangar. Here we await a military minder to accompany us to the secret court we cannot film.
We can, though, observe proceedings under strict conditions. Journalists, NGOs, family members of 9/11 victims can sit in a specially constructed gallery. There's a thick pane of glass which separates us from the court, and we can hear proceedings on a monitor above with a 40-second delay. This 40-second delay is designed to stop the public hearing any classified information.
In the court, we watched as the 5 men accused of complicity in the 9/11 attacks were brought in. But 17 years on, the trial proper still hasn't started. We attended the 30th pre-trial hearing. In the evening, we're told the next day's proceedings will be closed to the media and public. In these secret sessions, defense lawyers are given access to some classified information, but only some. Other evidence is considered so very secret that even defense lawyers with the highest security clearance can't be trusted with it. And who decides what they can see is a hugely contentious issue. In the transcripts of the open sessions, mention of Gina Haspel, Donald Trump's choice as head of the CIA, an appointment that caused controversy because she once ran a detention camp in Thailand in 2002 where torture was used. Gina Haspel has a key role as guardian of the CIA's secrets.
As head of the CIA, it's within her power to decide what classified information can be provided to the defense in this case.
So has Gina Haspel blocked evidence which could help the defense? To find out, we set off from the confines of Camp Justice to ask one of the defense lawyers. Away from the camp, Guantanamo Naval Base has all the trappings of small-town America.
Getting your day started right. 102 Radio Gitmo.
It even has its own radio station with a souvenir shop and a fun slogan, rocking in Fidel's backyard. We meet up with defense lawyer James CONNELL again. But when we ask him about Gina Haspel's role, it turns out there's some questions he's not allowed to answer.
Gina Haspel, as director of CIA, controls the pipeline of information from the CIA to the prosecution to us.
But is there any evidence she's acted as an impediment in any of that, personally?
I can't answer that question.
You can't answer that question. Is there a suggestion that she might have done?
I can't answer that question.
So are you saying that the US government, as the prosecution, holds all the cards in their hand? Is that what your view of all of this is?
In this military commission, which was set up for the express purpose of preventing information about torture from getting out to the public, the prosecution...
You really believe that? It was set up to prevent information about torture getting out to the public? Wasn't it set up for due process, for justice, for the 9/11 victims? Wasn't that why it was set up?
No, there's no question that the reason why we are here in Guantanamo Bay on an inaccessible military base with strict controls on the media, strict controls on the defense attorneys, strict controls on the defendants themselves, strict controls on every other participant in the process, is to prevent information from about torture from getting out to the public.
The Department of Defense told us they strove to ensure the process is as transparent as possible when balanced with requirements of national security. As the week's legal proceedings end, there's a press conference of sorts. The prosecution aren't coming, the attending media number just 6, including us.
I'll turn it over to the defense teams.
Lieutenant Colonel Derek Poteet is one of the defence lawyers for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. He warns a trial could be years away.
The government is trying to hide so very much that you end up with this interminable delay, and it's disturbing, I think, to everybody involved, but most especially to the victim family members.
The Department of Defense say there's no time limit on the process, which is geared towards fairness rather than an arbitrary deadline. The Pentagon regularly invites relatives of the victims of 9/11 to attend open sessions of the military court hearings. Some of the views this group expresses are perhaps a little unexpected. LEILA and Jessica Murphy lost their father, Brian.
Though this week I have thought a lot about my father, and I have thought a lot about the deep loss felt by so many people. But at the same time, I feel frustrated by the way certain issues are being covered in the courtroom. It's been a lot of talking about torture, and I feel frustrated with the US government for refusing to be accountable for certain actions and measures that were taken post 9/11 that I think are also really important.
Joel Shapiro, who lost his wife, has spoken out publicly about his frustration at the length of time this has taken and suggests a plea bargain could speed things up.
I suggested taking the death penalty off the table as part of plea bargains.
Killing people doesn't erase the killing of other people.
MARION, who lost her daughter Mary Ray, says she's proud there will be a proper trial.
I don't think most people have any idea the lengths we've gone to make it a fair trial.
But, like others, MARION has concerns about the death penalty.
The death penalty makes us like them. It doesn't solve anything, and you go through years and years and years of this.
I wish that the death penalty were removed as an option in this case, because I believe, well, it would go a lot faster, but also I don't think that our government has the moral authority to kill. And I think especially not in this case, given the actions that were taken post 9/11, and killing these men won't bring back my father.
Later, we asked Colonel Wendy Kelly of the Military Commissions what she made of the relatives' comments.
Well, I think that victims have the absolute right to let the government know what they want. I mean, as a prosecutor, you always want to know what it is the victims are seeking. Ultimately, however, that's a decision by, the United States of America, not mine.
We were talking about classified information, and Gina Haspel, the CIA director, is ultimately responsible for what information is classified and what is not. What do you make of that, Gina Haspel's role in being the ultimate authority on all?
I think that's way beyond my ability to comment.
The entrance to Camp America, where many soldiers are stationed. A few minutes' drive away, 40 prisoners remain incarcerated, most held in Camp 6. Elsewhere, Camp 7 houses so-called high-value detainees. We can't film there. Its location is a state secret. One thing we are allowed to film, the Boneyard, a collection of mementos of previous postings, which could be destined to grow even larger under the command of a president who has vowed to keep Gitmo open and load it up with bad dudes.
We have new leadership, new direction, and we have been tasked to prepare for an enduring detainee operations mission. We have identified as a priority is the construction of a new high-value detention center, which would be referred to as Camp 8, because we do see the need in the future to care for that aging high-value detainee population.
Your Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, has said that torture works and he would reintroduce waterboarding in a heartbeat. How does that impact on the work you do here at Guantanamo?
So at Guantanamo Bay, all of our detention operations are conducted in line with Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, and I'm not a spokesperson for the White House, so I'm not in a position to comment on anything that the president has said.
Commander LEANOS may not be able to comment on her Commander-in-Chief's statements, but what he says counts. In January 2017, President-elect Trump tweeted that there should be no further releases from Gitmo. And that was ominous news for detainees who'd been cleared for release under President Obama. Casablanca, Morocco, the home of Mustafa Nasser. In 2004, he and his family received shocking news from the International Committee of the Red Cross. Mustafa's brother, Abdul Latif, who lived abroad, had been imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay.
يعني طبعا التفكير ديالنا راه طبعا ما غاديش حنا تبهضنا يعني سالنا كيفاش اخ ديالي وصل لهذا المكان هذا مع العلم انني كنعرف خويا انسان طيب انسان عقل ديالو كيفكر عنده طموح كبير اكبر منه هويا لكن تصدمنا صدمه وكل العائله بقات مصدومه وكتساءل مع بعضها بعض.
The US claimed he had connections to extremists, but no charges have ever been brought against him. Then, in 2016, Abdul Latif's case was heard by a Guantanamo Periodic Review Board, a body containing representatives from 6 US agencies, including the Department of Defense. They'd cleared him for release. In Casablanca, his overjoyed family made preparations for his return.
لكن أصبح عندنا أمل وأصبحنا كنعيشوا على هذاك الأمل.
But the wheels of bureaucracy ground slowly, and as the day of Donald Trump's inauguration approached, lawyers made a last-ditch legal bid to have Abdul Latif released immediately. The court rejected the bid on procedural grounds. Since then, the American government has argued that they can continue to hold Guantanamo prisoners without charge until such time as the US war on terror has ended. And this, they've said, could be 100 years' war. Today, Abdul Latif is still in Guantanamo after 16 years, with no immediate prospect of release.
إحساسي أنني باغي نضم أخ ديالي وباغي نقربوا ليه وباغي نعلق أخ ديالي وباغي نهضر معاه وباغي نعاود نتذكر الذكريات اللي أنا بيني وبين عبد اللطيف خويا بغيت نشوفه.
Since Trump became president, not a single person has prevailed in the periodic review process. And that's not a coincidence. And anyone who says it is just an idiot. So they're not letting anyone go for purely political reasons. These people are just pawns in a pathetic and tragic game, political game.
But for insiders we talk to, one of their biggest concerns is that it's President Donald Trump who is now in charge of setting the rules. They worry about what that means for the future.
If you don't admit to what we did, and and we're destined for this to occur again in the future. And of course, that's my concern right now. You have President Trump, who is enamored with torture, who has a thirst for brutality. I'm afraid that we're setting the conditions to return back to practices of brutality and state-sponsored torture as we have done in the past.
We asked the US Department of Defense to respond to the allegation concerning periodic review boards at Guantanamo, but they did not address this. The CIA declined to comment on Gina Haspel's role classifying material, referring us to her public confirmation hearing, where she denied any conflict of interest in that role. The White House declined to explain President Trump's remarks about torture.